A wealthy rancher bids on a weeping horse at auction, then he discovers the terrible truth. The crowd laughs as the hammer falls. Dust rises, the church bell tolls in the distance. This isn't just any broken horse. It's Hollow Eye's hide. A story no man could ignore. The rancher thinks he's buying an animal, but what he takes home is a living cry for justice. By nightfall, a starving child slips onto his land, claiming the horse was hers stolen when her family was driven from their home. Suddenly, the rancher stands between a girl's last hope and the iron grip of the railroad. Threats tighten, the law turns its face, and whispers echo through the town. Why would a railroad fight so hard to keep one horse from going home? What secret lies buried in its past? And when a man who lost everything is asked to risk it all again, will he stand tall or break under the weight of truth? Comment below, and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The morning sun cast long shadows across the county auction yard as Jedediah Clay guided his horse through the bustling crowd. The crunch of boots on gravel and a low murmur of voices filled the crisp Colorado air. Dust motes danced in the early light, swirling around the weathered posts of the corral where livestock waited to be sold. Jed hadn't planned on coming today. His own ranch had plenty of good horses, and the thought of mingling with the crowd made his chest tighten. Since losing Sarah and the children to fever 3 years ago, he preferred the quiet company of his cattle and the vast empty spaces of his land. But his foreman needed new tools, and the auction was the best place to find them. The familiar sense of leather, hay, and horse sweat did nothing to lift his spirits. He dismounted stiffly, his boots raising small puffs of dust as they hit the ground. The leather of his saddle creaked as he tied his bay gelding to the hitching post. "Morning, Mr. Clay," several voices called out. Jed touched the brim of his hat in response, but kept walking. His eyes were fixed on the ground, counting steps until he could finish his business and return home. The auctioneer's voice rang out across the yard, drawing reluctant attention. "Next up, folks. Though I reckon we're scraping the bottom of the barrel with this one." Jed lifted his gaze despite himself. In the shadow of the corral stood a horse unlike any he'd seen before. An Appaloosa mare, her spotted coat dulled by neglect, stood trembling in the morning light. Her ribs showed clearly beneath her hide, and her head hung low, but it wasn't her poor condition that caught Yet's eye. It was her eyes, dark pools, that seemed to shimmer with unshed tears. "Look at this sorry specimen." The auctioneer called out, generating scattered laughter from the crowd. "Might be good for dog food if you're feeling generous to your hounds." More laughter rippled through the gathering. Jed felt his jaw tighten. The mare's ears twitched at the harsh voices, but she didn't lift her head. "Do I hear $2? The auctioneer called out mockingly. "Surely someone needs a new scarecrow for their cornfield." $1.50. Someone shouted, triggering more cruel chuckles. $2. Another voice called. Yet's hand rose before he could think better of it. $20, he said, his voice rough from disuse. The laughter died immediately. Heads turned, and Jed felt the weight of surprised stares. He kept his eyes on the mare. "Did I hear that right?" The auctioneer's showman's smile faltered. $20 from Mr. Clay? $25, Jed said more firmly, taking a step forward. A railroad man in a fine suit, Samuel Burke. Jed recognized him from previous dealings. Raised an eyebrow. "Lost your mind, Clay? That nag ain't worth the bullet it took to put her." "Down." Jed ignored him, watching as the mare's ear twitched toward his voice. There was something in her bearing, beneath the fear and exhaustion, that spoke of better days, of spirit not quite broken. $25 going once, the auctioneer called, his earlier mockery replaced by confusion. Going twice, no other. Bids came. The crowd had fallen into an awkward silence, broken only by the occasional stamp of hooves and the distant call of a meadowlark. "Sold to Mr. Clay," the auctioneer announced, shaking his head. "Though I reckon you've been out in the sun too long, sir?" Jed walked to the corral, his spurs jingling quietly with each step. The mare flinched when he reached for her rope, but didn't pull away. Up close, He could see the marks of neglect more clearly, the tangles in her mane, the old scars on her flanks, the way she favored her left front leg ever so slightly. "Easy now," he murmured, running a weathered hand along her neck. She trembled at his touch, but didn't shy away. "Easy there, girl." He led her carefully past the staring onlookers, past Burke's calculating gaze, past the tools he'd come to buy, and forgotten all about. His own horse nickered a greeting as they approached, and for the first time, the Mare lifted her head slightly. The ride home was slow. Jed didn't push her, letting her set the pace as they traveled the familiar road. To his ranch, the spring breeze carried the scent of sage and prairie grass, and gradually the Mare's steps grew steadier. The sun was setting by the time they reached his stable, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Yet's ranch hands paused in there. Evening chores to stare at the unexpected addition, but knew better than to comment. He took his time getting her settled, laying fresh straw and filling the water trough. She accepted a handful of oats cautiously, her soft lips tickling his palm. In the lantern light, her eyes seemed less desperate, though that haunting sadness remained. "What possessed me to buy you?" He wondered aloud, working tangles from her mane with gentle fingers. The Mare leaned slightly into his touch, and something shifted in Yet's chest. An ache he'd carried, so long he'd almost forgotten it was there. The stable was quiet except for the soft sounds of horses breathing and the occasional rustle of straw. Jed found himself talking to her as he worked, his voice rough and unpracticed. He told her about the good pastures where she'd grow strong again, about the Sweet Creek water and the shelter of cottonwood trees. He didn't mention Sarah or the children or the empty house where he no longer slept well. But somehow, looking into those liquid eyes, he felt they understood each other's grief. When he finally turned to leave, the Mare whickered softly. Jed paused at the stable door, looking back at her shadowy form. The moonlight filtering through the window caught her eye, and for a moment he could have sworn he saw a glimmer of hope there. "Rest easy," he told her, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "You're home now." Walking back to his house under the stars, Jed felt something he couldn't quite name stirring in his spirit, like the first warm breeze after a long winter. He didn't understand why he'd spent good money on a broken-down Mare, or why her sad eyes had reached past his careful walls. But for the first time since he'd buried his family, he felt the faintest flicker of purpose. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd see about getting her properly fed and cared for. Maybe send for the horse doctor to look at that leg. Small steps, but steps forward nonetheless. Like the Mare, he'd forgotten how to trust, how to hope. Maybe they could remember together. Their first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky when Jedediah Clay stepped out of his empty house. The spring air held a bitter chill that matched his mood. His boots crunched across the frosted ground as he made his way to the stable, carrying a carefully measured portion of oats dot inside. The Mare's head lifted at his approach. Her spotted coat looked less dull in the early light, filtering through. The stable windows. Jed set the feed bucket down and approached slowly, letting her catch his scent. "Easy there," he murmured, reaching for the curry brush he'd left hanging nearby. As he began to groom her, his experienced hands found evidence of her harsh past. Beneath the tangled coat, scars crisscrossed her back and flanks, the kind that spoke of brutal overwork and careless handling. "Railroad grading crews," he muttered, recognizing the pattern of marks left by ill-fitting harnesses pulled too tight. His jaw tightened as he pictured her straining under heavy loads, driven past exhaustion by impatient handlers. But unlike the wild-eyed horses he'd gentled before, this Mare didn't flinch from his touch. She leaned slightly into the brush strokes, her breath warm and steady. When he reached a particularly sensitive spot, she only shifted her weight, trusting him to be gentle. "That's right," he said softly, working out a stubborn knot in her mane. "Nobody's going to hurt you here. The familiar motions of grooming filled him with an unexpected peace. For months, he'd moved through his days like a man sleepwalking, doing only what needed doing. But now his hands had purpose again, and his heart felt lighter for it. The morning passed quickly as he tended to her needs. He cleaned her stall, laid fresh straw, and checked her water. Small tasks, but they felt right. Important, even. When he finally turned to his other chores. She nickered softly after him docked by mid-morning. Jed was riding into town for supplies. The streets were busy with wagons and townspeople going about their business. He hadn't gone 20 paces before he caught the first whispered comment. There goes Chloe. Paid a fortune for a nag not fit for glue. Jed kept his eyes forward, his face impassive. More whispers followed him down the street, carried on the spring breeze. $25, I heard. Must have lost his mind after. Since his family passed, the general store's bell jangled as he pushed through the door. Inside, the familiar smells of coffee, leather, and tobacco wrapped around him. Mrs. Henderson, the owner's wife, gave him a sympathetic smile as he gathered. His supplies, grain, salt, coffee, and a few other necessities. Good morning, Mr. Clay. Jed turned to find Reverend Matthews standing nearby, his worn Bible tucked under one arm. The preacher's kind face held a concerned expression that made Yet's shoulders tense. Reverend, he acknowledged with a nod. We've missed you at services. The preacher said gently, The Lord's house is always open to those in need of comfort. Jed busied himself selecting coffee beans. Been busy with the ranch. Yes, I heard about your purchase yesterday. The Reverend's pause spoke volumes. Sometimes, Brother Clay, we need to focus on rebuilding our lives, not, he cleared his throat delicately, not wasting resources on lost causes. Jed measured out coffee in silence, letting the beans rattle against the scale's metal pan. Finally, he turned to face the well-meaning man. Much obliged for your concern, Reverend, he said quietly. But I reckon even lost causes deserve a chance at redemption. He paid for his supplies and left before the preacher could respond, the bell's jangle covering any reply. The ride home seemed longer than usual, the weight of others' judgment riding. With him, the sun was setting by the time he returned to his ranch, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. In the stable, he found the Mare calmer than she'd been that morning. She'd eaten most of her oats, and didn't startle when he entered her stall, after settling his horse and storing the supplies. Jed walked slowly to his house. The building loomed, large and dark against the twilight sky, too large for one man alone. He lit the lamp in the kitchen and fixed a simple supper of beans and bread. Eating mechanically at the table built for 6. Sarah had loved this kitchen. He could almost hear her humming as she worked, see her smile as she shooed the children away from fresh-baked pies, cooling on the windowsill. Little Mary would be 10 now, if the fever hadn't taken her. And James had been so proud to help with the ranch work. Already talking about which horse would be his when he turned 12. Jed pushed his plate away, appetite gone. 3 years hadn't dulled the ache of their absence. The house felt wrong without Sarah's laughter, without the thunder of small feet on wooden floors, without the chaos and joy of family life. He cleaned his dishes methodically, then picked up the lamp and walked back to the stable. The Mare's soft nickering welcomed him as he settled onto an upturned bucket near her stall. The lamplight cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Been a while since I'd done this, he said softly, his voice rough in the quiet stable. Sarah always said I was better at talking to horses than people. He paused, gathering thoughts long buried. She'd have liked you, I reckon. She always did have a soft spot for broken things. The Mare moved closer to the stall door, her breath stirring his sleeve. In the gentle light, her eyes seemed to hold understanding. Lord, Jed whispered, the words feeling strange on his tongue after so long. I ain't been much for praying since you took them home. Ain't been much for anything, truth be told. He swallowed hard. But this here Mar, she needs help. And maybe I do too. The prayer came haltingly at first, then easier as the words found their way back to him. He prayed for guidance, for healing, for the Mare, for himself, for the strength to face empty rooms and judgmental whispers, for purpose in a life that had lost its meaning. As he spoke, the Mare lowered her head to his shoulder, her presence warm and solid in the lamplight. Something fragile stirred in Yet's chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps its distant cousin. a sense that tomorrow might hold more than just existence. They sat together in the quiet stable, man and horse, each carrying their own wounds, each finding comfort in the other's presence. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering night. Its song carrying across the sleeping ranch, the evening shadows lengthened across Yet's ranch house as he settled into his old leather chair by the hearth. A small fire crackled, keeping the spring chill at bay. His thoughts drifted to the Apache, wondering again what trials had brought her to that auction yard. The gentle warmth and quiet soon had his eyes growing heavy. A sharp creak jolted him awake. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert. That sound, the distinctive groan of the barn door's rusty hinges. He'd been meaning to oil them for weeks. Jed rose silently, his weathered hands reaching for the Winchester rifle mounted above the mantel. Years of ranch life had taught him to be cautious about nighttime visitors. Rustlers weren't common in these parts anymore, but they weren't unheard of either. The night air bit cold as he eased open his front door. Stars blazed overhead in a clear sky, providing just enough light to navigate by. His boots made no sound on the packed earth as he approached the barn. Another soft noise drifted out, a whisper maybe or a song. The barn door stood slightly ajar. Jed positioned himself carefully beside it, rifle ready but pointed down. In one smooth motion, he pushed the door wider. "Don't move," he said firmly. Stepping inside, a small figure froze beside the Apache's stall, in the dim starlight filtering through the barn's high windows. Jed made out a child, a girl, no more than 12 years old. She wore a simple dress, patched in several places but clean. Her dark hair hung in 2 long braids, woven in the distinctive Apache style. In her outstretched hand, she held a piece of bread crust toward the mare. The Apache showed no fear of the girl. Instead, the horse stretched her neck forward, lips gently taking the offered bread. The mare's eyes, which had seemed so sad at the auction, held a different light now, recognition. "She's mine," the girl said suddenly, her voice quiet but fierce. She turned to face Jed fully, chin lifted in defiance, despite the rifle in his hands. "Her name is Estrella. She was stolen from us when the soldiers drove my father off our land." Jed studied her face in the darkness. Young as she was, her eyes held old pain. He lowered his rifle slowly, sensing no threat from this midnight visitor. "Your name?" he asked. "Maria Two Feathers." She straightened her shoulders, speaking with dignity beyond her years. "My mother was Apache. My father is Mexican, a vaquero. And you have no right to keep Estrella?" The Mar nickered softly at the name, confirming the girl's claim. Jed leaned his rifle against the wall, noting how Maria's hand rested on Estrella's neck, not in fear, but in familiarity. "Tell me," he said, keeping his voice gentle. Maria's words came in a rush, as though she'd held them back too long. She spoke of her father's small ranch, of the good grazing land they'd worked, of men who decided that land was too valuable for a Mexican and his half-Apache family, of threats of burning fences, of stolen horses, including Estrella, her father's gift to her on her 10th birthday. "Papa went to find help from the law," she finished. "He told me to hide in the hills if trouble came. I've been looking for Estrella ever since." Yet's chest tightened at her story. He'd heard whispers of such things. Good land stolen through. Violence and corruption. Families displaced with no recourse to justice. But hearing it from this brave child made it cut deeper. "Where are you staying now?" he asked. Maria's slight hesitation told him enough. She'd been sleeping rough, following rumors and leads about her stolen horse. "You'll catch your death out in this cold," he said. "The barn's warm enough tonight. There's clean straw in the empty stall next to Estrella." Surprise flickered across her face, followed by suspicion. "You're not sending me away?" "No," Jed said simply. "Not tonight. Night." He fetched a blanket from the tack room, heavy wool that smelled of horses but would keep her warm. Maria accepted it cautiously, still watching him as if expecting a trick. "I'll bring you some proper breakfast at dawn," he told her. "Get some. Rest." Back in his house, Jed sat heavily in his chair. Sleep was far away now. The girl's story rang true. It explained the Mare's condition, her sadness, everything he'd sensed about her. More importantly, it stirred something in him that had been dormant since he lost his family. The need to make things right. Dawn painted the sky in soft pink when Jed returned to the barn, carrying a plate of eggs and bacon, still warm, with thick slices of bread. He found Maria already awake, methodically brushing Estrella's coat. The Mare's eyes were half closed in contentment. "You handle her well," he observed, setting down the plate on a barrel. "She remembers me," Maria said. "I used to brush her every morning just like this." Her voice caught slightly. "Before they took her." Jed watched them together, the gentle way Maria worked out the tangles in Estrella's mane. How the horse leaned into her touch. There was no doubt about their bond. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "The ranch needs help. Fences need mending. Cattle need tending. Too much work for one man alone." He paused, making sure she was listening. "You could stay, help with the chores, and spend time with Estrella." Maria's hand stilled on the brush. "You mean it?" "I do. But there'd be rules. You need to work hard. Learn the ranch ways." "I know ranch work," she said quickly. "Papa taught. Me, I can ride, mentak, help with the cattle." Her eyes shone with hope and determination. "I'm strong. I won't let you down." Jed nodded, hiding how her words echoed his own son's eager promises from years ago. "We'll need to sort out proper arrangements. Can't have you sleeping in the barn forever. But for now," he gestured to the waiting breakfast, "best eat while it's hot." Maria set down the brush and approached the plate, her movements still cautious, but less wary than the night before. She bowed her head briefly over the food, whispering what might have been a prayer in Apache. Before picking up the fork, Estrella watched them both from her stall, her eyes no longer holding that deep sadness. Jed had first noticed at the auction. Something had changed, not just for the horse, but for all of them. The empty ranch that had felt like a tomb for so long now held a spark of new life, of possibility. It wouldn't be simple. There would be questions, arrangements to be made, proper channels to go through. And somewhere out there was Maria's father, still searching for justice. But for now, in the quiet morning light, Jed watched a young girl share her breakfast with a horse called Estrella, and felt the first stirrings of hope he'd known in years. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen, windows as Jed showed Maria. Around the small space, dust motes danced in the light, revealing surfaces that hadn't seen a proper cleaning in too long. The girl's eyes took in everything: the wood-burning stove, the worn countertops, the shelves of basic supplies. "Reckon you know your way around a kitchen?" Jed asked, suddenly aware of how sparse everything looked. Maria nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. "My mother taught me. We always had fresh tortillas and beans." She paused, her hands hovering over the flour bin. "May I?" "Help yourself," Jed said. He watched as she moved with quiet confidence, gathering cornmeal, salt, and water. Her movements were practiced, efficient, clearly her mother's daughter. The kitchen soon filled with the warm scent of cooking corn cakes. Maria worked the coffee pot with equal skill, measuring grounds carefully into the beaten tin vessel. The familiar aroma brought back memories of his own wife working in the same kitchen, humming as she prepared breakfast. But, for the first time, the memory didn't pierce him with pain. They sat at the scarred kitchen table, steam rising from their cups. Maria broke the silence first, her voice soft but steady. "The railroad men came at sunset." She stared into her coffee. "Papa was fixing fence on the north side. They had papers, they said, proved our land wasn't ours anymore." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "Mama got sick that winter. After we lost the house. The doctor in town wouldn't." She stopped, swallowed hard. Yet's throat felt tight. He'd heard rumors of such things. Railroad companies using any means to secure land they wanted, especially from families who lacked the money or connections to fight back. "They took Estrella when they seized everything else," Maria continued. "Papa said he'd find help, make them give back what was ours. He told me to hide in the hills if more trouble came." She looked up at Jed, That was 2 months ago. The coffee grew cold as she spoke of surviving alone, following whispers and rumors about her stolen horse. Jed listened, his heart heavy with each detail. The Mare had been more than just an animal. She was Maria's last connection to her family, to the life they'd built together. He studied the bill of sale in his pocket, the paper that legally made Estrella his property. But watching Maria's face as she spoke of the horse, he knew papers couldn't measure the deeper bonds of love and trust that by late afternoon. Jed decided they needed supplies. Proper food, clean clothes for Maria, basic necessities. The girl's eyes widened when he suggested going to town, but she squared her shoulders bravely. The wagon rattled down the dusty street as the sun began its westward slide. Heads turned as they passed. Jed felt the stares, heard the whispers that followed them into the general store. "Clay's gone soft," someone muttered, keeping a half-breed girl. Maria's back stiffened, but she kept her eyes forward, dignity in every line of her small frame. Jed found himself standing straighter too, anger burning in his chest at their narrow minds, thought Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife. Watched them with pursed lips as Maria selected simple calico fabric for a new dress. But when the girl politely asked about thread and needles, showing knowledge of proper sewing techniques, the woman's expression softened slightly. Their last stop was the church, where Reverend Matthews stood sweeping the steps. He greeted Jed with careful politeness. "Brother Clay," he said, eyes fixing on Maria. "I heard you taken in, a visitor." "Maria Two Feathers," Jed said firmly. "She's helping at the ranch." The Reverend's face creased with concern. "There's a fine orphanage in Denver," he said. "Christian people doing the Lord's work. They'd know how to handle someone of her background properly." Maria's hand found Yet's sleeve, fingers gripping tight. He felt her trembling. "Much obliged for your concern," Jed said, his tone making it clear the suggestion wasn't welcome. "But we're managing just fine." The ride home was quiet, Maria holding the packages of supplies in her lap like shields. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, while closer to home, chimney smoke rose straight in the still evening air. Dot in the kitchen, Maria moved with renewed purpose, preparing a simple supper of beans, fresh corn cakes, and coffee. The familiar scents filled the house, chasing away the emptiness that had haunted these rooms for so long. Over their meal, Maria gradually relaxed. She told him about her father teaching her to handle cattle, the proper way to read, a horse's mood, how to throw a rope true. "Papa said I was a natural," she said, demonstrating with an imaginary lariat. "First time I roped a calf, he laughed so hard he nearly fell off his horse." Her own laugh, bright and unexpected, filled the kitchen. Jed found himself smiling too, remembering his son's first attempts at roping. The memory still ached, but somehow sharing it with Maria's story made it easier to bear. Later, after Maria had gone to sleep in the small room he'd cleared for her, Jed sat in his chair by the fire. The house felt different now, warmer, despite the evening chill. For the first time in years, he found himself speaking to God not in grief or anger, but in gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, watching the flames dance, "for sending them. Both, the Mare and the girl." He paused, adding quietly, "Help me do right by them." The fire crackled in response, and somewhere in the barn, Estrella nickered softly. The sound drifted through the night air like a promise, like hope taking root in long fallow ground. From the small bedroom came the soft sound of Maria's steady breathing. Jed listened, marveling at how quickly the rhythm had become familiar. Necessary, the ranch no longer echoed with absence. Instead, it held the quiet music of shared lives, footsteps, laughter, the clatter of dishes, stories told over supper. The empty chairs at his table had new purpose now. The shadows that had haunted his home began to recede, pushed back by the light of unexpected companionship. The morning after Maria came to stay, Jed woke to the sound of chickens clucking and a soft voice drifting through the dawn air. He stepped onto the back porch, coffee cup in hand, and watched as Maria scattered feed in the chicken yard. Her movements were sure and gentle, practiced from years of similar mornings. "You're up early," he said, noting how the hens already seemed to trust her. "The sun waits for no one," Maria replied, reaching carefully under a brooding hen to collect. "Warm eggs." Mama always said morning chores feed evening bellies. Over the next few days, Maria fell into the rhythm of ranch life as naturally as rain soaking into dry earth. She swept the floors each morning, humming Apache hymns that made the work seem lighter. The melodies were strange to Yet's ears at first, but their quiet reverence touched something deep in his heart. While hanging laundry, Maria noticed Yet's shirts needed mending. That evening, she sat by lamplight, her small fingers working needle and thread with practiced care. Jed watched her from his chair, remembering how his wife used to do the same. "My mother taught me to make the stitches small," Maria explained, holding up her work for inspection. She said that way they hold better against hard work. Jed found himself joining her in daily tasks, showing her how he liked the tools arranged in the barn, learning from her how to gentle Estrella with soft words and careful hands. The mare responded to Maria's touch like a flower turning toward. Sunlight dot when Sunday came, Jed cleared his throat over breakfast. "Thought we might go to church today," he said, studying Maria's reaction. "If you're willing." Maria's fingers twisted in her skirt. "The people in town," she started, "are God's children too," Jed finished firmly. "Same as us." The church bell was ringing as they tied their horses outside. Maria smoothed her freshly pressed dress, the simple calico somehow transformed by her careful stitching. Heads turned as they entered, but yet steady presence beside her seemed to shield her from the worst of the stares. Reverend Matthews nodded to them from the pulpit, though his smile seemed uncertain. The congregation sang familiar hymns, Maria, following along in Yet's worn hymnal. When the final notes faded, the Reverend made an unexpected announcement. "As is our custom, we welcome visitors to share their own songs of praise," he said, his eyes meeting Maria's. "Perhaps our young friend might offer something?" Maria looked up at Jed, who squeezed her hand gently. Slowly, she stood and walked to the front of the church. For a moment, she stood silent, then lifted her voice in an Apache hymn, the melody. Rose pure and clear in the morning air, filling the small church with its strange beauty. Though the words were foreign, their meaning reached beyond language, speaking of faith that endured through loss, hope that bloomed in desert places. Several women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Even the children sat still, caught by the song's gentle power. When Maria finished, silence held for a heartbeat before Mrs. Peterson, who had been so cold in the store, started the applause. Other hands joined in, and Maria's shy smile brightened the whole church. After the service, several women approached to compliment her voice. Mrs. Peterson even invited them both to Sunday dinner next week. For a moment, it seemed the walls of suspicion might truly be crumbling, but as they stepped into the sunlight, a well-dressed man intercepted them. His suit was city-cut, his boots barely dusty. "Mr. Clay," he said smoothly. "Samuel Burke, Railroad Land Office. Might I have a word?" Jed nodded to Maria. "Wait by the horses," he said quietly. She went, though her worried glance showed she sensed the tension. Burke led Jed around the corner of the church. "Quite a performance," he said, examining his pocket. "Watch. The girl has talent. I'll grant that. But surely you understand the delicacy of the situation." "Speak plain," Jed said, his voice hard. "Very well." Burke snapped the watch closed. "The land the girl claims was legally acquired by the railroad. Her father's resistance was unfortunate, but the law is clear. Your grazing leases cover considerable acreage, Mr. Clay. It would be a shame if supporting her claims led to complications with their renewal." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Yet's hands clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice level. "That's mighty interesting, considering those leases are signed and paid through 1900. Papers can be lost, Mr. Clay. Boundaries disputed." Burke's smile never reached his eyes. "Best to consider carefully where your interests truly lie." He touched his hat brim and walked away, leaving Jed with a cold knot in his stomach. Everything he'd built over 20 years of hard work, the ranch, the cattle, His reputation? All could be stripped away if he chose wrong. Maria was brushing Estrella when they returned home, singing one of her hymns, while the Mare dozed contentedly. Jed walked the fence line alone that evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The land stretched before him, good grazing that had supported his herds through lean years and fat. His whole life's work lay in these acres, but as darkness crept across the prairie, he thought of Maria's father. Driven from land, he'd worked honest. He thought of her mother, dead because no doctor would treat her. He remembered his own loss, how grief had nearly broken him until an abused horse and a brave girl brought purpose back to his days. Standing in the gathering dusk, Jed knew that staying silent now would make him no better than those who had wronged Maria's family. Whatever the cost, truth demanded speaking. Justice required action. His wife would have expected no less of him. The lights of the house glowed warm against the night. Through the window, he could see Maria setting the table for supper, moving through his kitchen as if she belonged there. Perhaps she did. Perhaps that was exactly what God had intended when he brought her to his door. Estrella nickered softly from her stall as if agreeing. Jed squared his shoulders and headed inside, where Maria waited with fresh coffee and the quiet grace of one who had learned to face each day with courage. And no matter what it might bring, the morning sun had barely cleared the mountains when Jed saddled 2 horses. He secured a leather pouch inside his vest, close to his heart. The worn document it contained might change everything, or bring trouble down on them all. Maria emerged from the house carrying a bundle wrapped in clean cloth. "I made corn cakes and dried beef for the journey," she said, tying the food to her saddle with practiced hands. Jed nodded, checking the cinch on her horse. "It's a fair ride to the county seat. We'll need it." The county clerk's office sat in a red brick building at the edge of Sterling, its windows dusty with prairie wind. Inside, the air smelled of paper and ink. A bell tinkled as they entered, their boot heels echoing on the wooden floor. The clerk, Mr. Peterson, peered at them over wire-rimmed spectacles. His desk overflowed with leather-bound record books and stacks of documents. "Mr. Clay," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "What brings you to town?" Jed placed the pouch on the desk. "Got some papers need looking at." Maria stood straight beside him, her chin lifted proudly, though her hands trembled slightly. From the pouch, Jed withdrew her father's deed the edges. Saw for the age, but the ink still clear. "This here's a legal claim," Jed explained, "belonging to Jose Two Feathers. Railroad men say they bought it fair, but something don't sit right." Peterson adjusted his spectacles and carefully unfolded the document. His fingers traced the official seals, the signatures, the precisely drawn property lines. "This is proper work," he muttered. "Registered 19 years ago." He pulled a massive ledger from a shelf, its pages crackling as he searched through dates and names. "Here we are, Two Feathers Homestead." His frown deepened. "Now, that's peculiar." "What is it?" Maria asked, stepping forward. "The railroad's claim. It was filed just 6 months back, but it's dated 3 years ago." Peterson tapped the entry with his finger. "Ink's too fresh for that. And these signatures," he shuffled through more papers. "They don't match our other records." Hope blazed in Maria's eyes. "Then they lied? They stole our land." "Appears so." Peterson's face was grave. "This needs proper investigation. I'll have to send inquiries to Denver, maybe even Washington." He looked at Jed. "Could be trouble, Mr. Clay. Railroad folk don't take kindly to questions." "Don't take kindly to theft either," Jed replied firmly. "Do what needs doing?" Outside, Maria's smile could have lit the prairie. They mounted up and rode toward home, taking a longer trail that followed Cedar Creek. At midday, they stopped in a grove of cottonwoods where the creek pooled deep and clear. While the horses drank, Maria knelt by the water's edge. Her lips moved in silent prayer, hands cupped to catch the flow. "Mama taught me to always thank the water," she explained. "Without its blessing, nothing lives." She spoke the words aloud then, soft Apache syllables that seemed to merge with the creek's gentle music. She said water remembers all it touches, the mountains where it begins, the earth it crosses, the people who depend on its gift. Jed removed his hat, moved by the simple reverence of her ritual. They shared the corn cakes and beef in comfortable silence, listening to birds call in the branches above. Here, away from town and troubles, peace settled over them like a warm blanket. But reality waited at the ranch. When they rode into the yard, Yet's hired hands gathered near the corral, their faces hard. Tom Wheeler, who'd worked for Jed longest, stepped forward. "Boss, we need words," he said, not looking at Maria. "About this situation." "Get on with evening feed first," Jed replied evenly. "We'll talk after." Maria slipped away to the house while Jed dealt with the men. Their complaints tumbled out like winter hail. She wasn't their kind. She'd bring trouble. The railroad would. Cut off water rights. Fear spoke louder than reason. "You all known me 15 years or more," Jed finally said. "When have I ever led this ranch wrong?" His voice carried the weight of those years, of trust earned through fair dealing. "That girl and her horse were wronged. We're making it right. Any man who can't abide that can draw his wages tonight." No one moved. Wheeler scuffed his boot in the dirt. "Just don't want to lose what we've built here, boss." "Neither do I," Jed answered. "But some things matter more than safety." Later, as lamplight warmed the kitchen windows, Maria stirred a pot of fragrant stew. Her movements were slower than usual, weighted with worry. "I heard the men talking," she said quietly. "Maybe I should go, before more trouble comes." Jed set down his coffee cup harder than he meant to. "You'll do no such thing. This is your home now, long as you want it." "But the railroad men, they hurt Papa when he wouldn't leave. They might hurt you too." Her voice caught. "I couldn't bear that." "Listen here." Jed moved to stand beside her, his weathered hand gentle on her shoulder. "Your Papa stood alone. We're not alone. The law's on our side this time, and right with it. No one's running you off again." Maria nodded, but fear still shadowed her eyes. Jed understood. He checked every latch and lock himself that night, testing the barn doors twice. In Estrella's stall, Maria brushed the Mare's coat until it gleamed in the lantern light. The horse dipped her head to nuzzle the girl's hair, their bond visible in every tender gesture watching them. Jed saw not just a girl and her horse, but two souls who had endured loss and found each other again. Like him, they carried scars, but also like him, they had found new hope in this unlikely family they were building. "Time for sleep," he said softly. "Tomorrow's soon enough for worrying." Maria hugged Estrella once more, then followed him to the house. The Mare's soft nickering followed them, a gentle goodnight in the gathering dark dot in his room. Jed added wood to the stove and sat in his chair by the window. The moon cast silver light on the yard below, peaceful now. But he kept his Winchester close, watching until Maria's lamp went dark across the hall. Whatever came, he would keep his promise. She was home now, and home meant safe. The days that followed flowed like honey, sweet and slow. Each morning, Maria rose before dawn to tend Estrella and prepare breakfast. As pale sunlight filled the kitchen, she taught Jed her mother's prayers, ancient. Words of gratitude for earth and sky, for corn and water, for the breath of life itself. "We say thanks even for small things," she explained, stirring cornmeal into bubbling water. "Mama said gratitude keeps the heart soft, like rain softens dry ground." Jed listened, his own heart softening day by day. In turn, he shared his knowledge. Ranching. They rode the fence lines together, Maria on Estrella, learning to spot broken wire and loose posts. Her small hands grew confident with tools, and her eyes sharp for signs of trouble. "Watch how the cattle move," he taught her. "They'll show you where fences need mending before you see the breaks yourself." One golden afternoon, they paused atop a rise overlooking the valley. Maria sat easy in her saddle, no longer the frightened girl who had crept into his barn. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its cry carrying on the wind. "Papa used to say hawks are messengers," Maria said softly. "They see everything from above and warn of danger coming. As if summoned by her words, a dark smudge appeared on the horizon. At first, Jed thought it was just another dust devil spinning across the prairie, but it held steady, growing darker. "Smoke," he said sharply, "coming from the east." Maria's face went pale. "That's where our old home was." They spurred their horses forward, racing across the grassland. The smoke thickened as they drew closer, bitter and black. Cresting a hill, they pulled up hard at the site below Dot the Two Feathers homestead, already abandoned and weather-worn was, now engulfed in flames. What remained of the adobe walls crumbled in the heat. The small corral where Estrella had once grazed was reduced to charred posts. Even the ancient cottonwood that had shaded the yard was burning, its branches crackling. Like gunfire. Estrella danced nervously, the fire reflecting in her wide eyes. Maria sat frozen, watching her childhood home burn to ashes. But it was the message that made Yet's blood run cold, crude letters, carved deep into a surviving fence post. "Stay silent, railroad men," he growled, warning us off from that investigation. Maria's voice trembled. "They burned everything. Every last piece of home. This wasn't your home anymore, child. Your home's with me now." But even as he spoke, Jed knew the damage was done. This wasn't just destruction. It was a threat written in flame and smoke. They rode back as sunset painted the sky blood red. Neither spoke, but Jed could feel Maria's shoulders shaking as she fought back tears. At the ranch, more bad news waited. Tom Wheeler and the other hands stood by the bunkhouse, their belongings packed in saddlebags. Wheeler wouldn't meet Yet's eyes. "We're moving on, boss," he said gruffly. "Can't fight the railroad. They'll take the water, then the grazing rights. Everything we've built here will die on the vine." Jed dismounted slowly. 15 years, Tom. That counts for nothing. Counts for plenty, but we got families to think about. Wheeler swung into his saddle. "You're a good man, Mr. Clay. Too good, maybe. World ain't ready for that kind of good yet." One by one, the hands rode out, dust rising behind them in the gathering dark. Maria stood in the kitchen doorway, watching them go. Her face was streaked with tears. "I've ruined everything," she whispered as Jed approached. "Your men, your ranch, your peace, all gone because of me." "None of this is your doing," Jed said firmly. "The railroad men are the ones choosing wrong." But Maria only shook her head. Over supper, she barely touched her food. "I'll leave at dawn," she said finally. "Go somewhere far away. Then maybe they'll leave you alone. Now you listen here." Jed set down his fork. "This is your home. We'll face this together." Maria managed a sad smile. "You've been so kind to me. Like a father. That's why I can't let them hurt you too." Despite Yet's protests, she went to bed early. He stayed up late, checking locks and loading his rifle, trying to think of words that would convince her to stay. But when he finally slept, his dreams were troubled by smoke and flame. He woke before sunrise to find Maria's bed empty, the blankets cold. Estrella's stall stood open, fresh hoof prints leading away in the pre-dawn dark. On the kitchen table, a note written in careful letters. "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry. They will leave you alone now." Yet's hand shook as he read the words. The tracks led east toward the railroad camp. She had gone to surrender herself, thinking it would save him and the ranch. His chest ached with a familiar emptiness, the same hollow feeling that had haunted him since losing his family. He slumped into his chair by the cold stove, the morning light growing stronger outside. The house felt vast and silent, echoing with absence. No quiet prayers or gentle singing. No laughter or stories shared over meals. Just emptiness, restored to its former completeness. In the yard. A meadowlark called. The sound Maria had said meant hope was coming. But now it seemed to mock him. He had failed her, just as he had failed to save his wife and children. The railroad would win again, grinding decent folk to dust beneath its iron wheels. The sun climbed higher, warming the empty kitchen where Maria's corn cake still sat wrapped in cloth, prepared for a day that would never come. Jed remained motionless, crushed by the weight of loss and defeat. Outside, the prairie wind moaned around the eaves, carrying away the last traces of the fragile happiness they had built together. The empty ranch mocked Jed with its silence. Each morning, he forced himself through familiar motions, feeding animals, checking fences, mending tack. But his movements were wooden, his spirit far away. No cheerful voice called good morning. No soft Apache prayers blessed the sunrise. Even Estrella's stall stood empty, a dark cave that seemed to swallow what little hope remained in the kitchen. Dishes gathered dust where Maria had kept them gleaming. The copper kettle hung tarnished and cold, no longer singing with morning. Coffee. Jed ate his meals standing up now, unable to face the empty chair where she had sat, telling stories of her father's adventures with wild horses. One evening, as sunset painted the western sky in shades of fire, the loneliness crushed, down so hard he could barely breathe. He saddled his horse and rode toward town, barely seeing the trailhead. The church stood dark against deepening twilight, its white-painted boards glowing faintly in the last light. Jed tied his horse and pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, lamp oil burned low in wall sconces, casting dancing shadows across. Empty pews. His boots echoed on bare floorboards as he made his way to the front, where he had sat with Maria that Sunday she had sung her hymn, the memory of her voice clear and pure as mountain. Spring water broke something inside him. Jed fell to his knees beside the rough-hewn pew, bowing his head as grief poured out. Lord, he whispered, voice cracking. I ain't talked to you proper since Sarah and the little ones passed. Figured you weren't listening anymore. He drew a ragged breath. But that girl, she showed me how to pray again. Showed me faith ain't just words in a book, but helping them that need help. Now she's gone too, and I failed her just like I failed my family. Tears fell freely now, spattering. The dusty floor. I know I ain't worthy to ask favors. But please show me how to make this right. Show me how to bring her home. You ain't alone in this, Jedediah Clay. The quiet voice startled him. Reverend Matthews stepped from the shadows near the pulpit, his lined face gentle in the lamplight. Didn't mean to disturb your prayers, the preacher said softly. But I heard what you said, and I got a confession of my own. He settled heavily onto a nearby pew. My own brother lost his spread to railroad fraud 10 years back. Good water, right? Prime grazing, all stolen with forged papers and bought judges. I kept quiet then. Told myself it wasn't my place to meddle. He shook his head slowly. Been carrying that shame ever since. Jed straightened, wiping his eyes with a rough sleeve. Reckon lots of folks lost land that way. Too many. And here, I was warning you off from helping that child. The Reverend's voice held self-reproach. When she sang that hymn, I never heard such pure faith. Made me remember what this church is supposed to stand for. Hope stirred faintly in Yet's chest. Ain't too late to stand up now. No, it ain't. Matthews clasped Yet's shoulder. You got more friends than you know, brother. Let me help spread the word. Dawn found Jed riding east, following an old trail into the foothills. Pine shadows dappled the path as his horse picked its way higher, toward a cabin he hadn't visited. In years, smoke rose from the chimney, a good sign. Henry Lone Elk stood in the doorway before Jed could dismount, as if he'd been expecting company. The Ute scout's dark eyes held neither surprise nor welcome, just patient waiting. Been a while, Henry, Jed said, stepping down. Still breaking horses? Not since railroad men shot my best stallion. Henry's voice was neutral. Said he was. Spooking their survey crews. You riding for them now? No. Jed met the other man's gaze steadily. I'm riding against them. Need your help. Henry's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. Come inside. Coffee's hot. Over steaming cups, Jed told the whole story, Maria and Estrella, the burned homestead, the threats and intimidation. Henry listened without comment, though his fingers tightened on his cup at mention of the forged land claims. Same trick they used on my people, he said when Jed finished. Paper lies and gun smoke. He set his cup down carefully. Why should I help? White man's law. Never helped us. Because you know it ain't right, Jed replied. Because you worked my ranch 5 years and I never cheated you because that girl's got nobody else. Henry studied him for a long moment. You were fair to me, Clay. When my boy was sick, you gave me time off with wages. He nodded slowly. I know every trail in these hills. Know where railroad men camp, where they keep their papers. That worth something to you. Worth everything, Jed said fervently. I aim to face them in public, with witnesses and proof. No guns, just truth in plain sight. A ghost of a smile touched Henry's weathered face. Good plan. Bullets just mate. Martyrs. Shame works better. He rose and took down his rifle. I'll help, but not for you, for the girl. She's caught between two worlds like my children. Deserves better than being ground under iron wheels. Yet's next stop was easier. The Ladies' Aid Society met Wednesday afternoons in the church basement, planning charity work and sharing news. When he appeared at their door, conversation stuttered to silence. Ladies, he said, hat in hand. I need your help. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, frowned. This about that Indian girl? The one who's staying here? Yes, ma'am. Her name's Maria. And she needs Christian folks to stand up for what's right. He told them everything, watching faces shift from suspicion to sympathy. When he described the burning homestead, several women dabbed at their eyes. My word, Mrs. Peterson said softly. Those poor people, and that sweet child, I remember her hymn. Touched my heart like nothing else. Shameful business, agreed. Mrs. Taylor, the blacksmith's wife. My Tom says those railroad men are nothing but thieves in fancy coats. We can't let them drive her away, declared Mrs. Peterson firmly. What do you need from us, Mr. Clay? Witnesses, Jed replied. Respectable folk willing to stand up in public and say this ain't right. The railroad counts on decent people staying. Quiet. The women exchanged glances. Mrs. Peterson nodded decisively. Count us in. We'll spread the word quiet-like, so those railroad fellows don't catch wind too soon. When the time comes, you'll have your witnesses. Riding home that evening, Jed felt life flowing back into his veins. The setting sun no longer seemed to mock him with memories of Maria. Instead, it lit the western sky with promise, like a signal. Fire calling folks together, he touched the small leather pouch that held her father's deed. Hold on, child, he whispered. Help's coming. Just hold on a little longer. At the ranch, he lit the kitchen lamp and spread out paper on the table. Time to plan. Henry would scout the railroad camp, learn their routines. The church ladies would rally townsfolk who'd lost land or loved ones to the company's greed. And Jed would face down Samuel Burke and his hired guns with nothing but truth and witnesses. For the first time in days, he felt truly hungry. As he stirred up the stove fire, he found himself humming Maria's hymn. The tune wasn't quite right, but the spirit of it filled the kitchen with warmth again. Sometimes he realized a man had to lose everything to find what really mattered. Outside, a coyote called 3 sharp yips that Maria had said meant change was coming. Jed smiled. Change was coming indeed, carried on prayers and promises and the strength of good people standing together. The railroad was about to learn that some things couldn't be bought or bullied, not faith, not justice, and not the love of a father for his chosen child. Dawn painted the eastern sky in bands of rose and gold. As riders gathered at the Clay Ranch, Jed checked his saddle cinch one final time, the leather creaking beneath his fingers. Behind him, Henry Lone Elk sat motionless on his paint horse, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. Mrs. Peterson and her husband waited in their wagon, while Reverend Matthews mounted his steady roan. Other townsfolk who had lost land to the railroad joined them quietly. The miller, 2 farmers, a blacksmith, and his wife. The morning air held a bite of autumn chill. Jed touched the deed in his vest pocket, making sure it was secure. His heart ached, remembering Maria's empty bunk, her few belongings still scattered where she had left them in her hurried flight. Railroad depot's 4 hours east, Henry said softly. My scouts say they're holding the girl there, waiting for the noon train. Plan to ship her to an orphanage in Denver. Jed nodded grimly. Then we'd best get moving. He turned to address the gathered group. their faces earnest in the early light. Folks, I thank you for coming. You all know what's at stake here. The railroad's been stealing land with forged papers, counting on good people staying quiet out of fear. Today, we aim to change that. About time somebody did, the miller muttered. Others nodded in agreement. Here's how we'll play it, Jed continued. We ride in casual, spread out. Don't want them spotting us as a group. Blend in with the depot crowd. There's always folks waiting on trains. When you see me step forward with a deed, that's your signal to gather around. The more witnesses, the harder it'll be for them to twist the truth. What if they try violence? Mrs. Peterson asked, clutching her shawl. They won't, Henry said firmly. Not with respectable townsfolk watching. Railroad men fear shame more than bullets. Jed mounted his horse, settling into the familiar creak of leather. Remember, no weapons drawn unless they shoot first. We're here for justice, not bloodshed. The small company set out as the sun cleared the horizon, taking the east road toward the railroad depot. Dust rose beneath their horses' hooves, and morning birds called from the fence posts. Jed rode at the front, his thoughts on Maria. Was she afraid? Had they hurt her? His hands tightened on the reins. Henry drew alongside, reading his expression. The girl is strong, he said quietly. Like her mother's people. She will endure. She shouldn't have to, Jed replied. No child should face such cruelty. They rode on as the sun climbed higher. The depot appeared around mid-morning, a cluster of wooden buildings beside the gleaming rails. Smoke rose from the station house chimney, and a scatter of wagons and horses showed a fair crowd already gathered. Following their plan, the group separated, approaching from different directions. Jed dismounted at the hitching rail, carefully scanning the yard. His heart clenched when he spotted Maria. She sat on a crate near the loading platform, her small hands bound with rope. Two armed men lounged nearby, watching her with bored expressions. Estrella stood roped to a post several yards away, her head hanging low. The Mare's coat was dull, showing days without proper care. Maria's face lit briefly when she saw Jed, but fear quickly shadowed her eyes. She shook her head slightly, warning. Him away. One of the guards noticed her reaction and straightened, nudging his companion. Well, look who showed up. The taller guard sneered, hand resting on his pistol. Clay himself, come to say goodbye to his little savage. Jed forced himself to appear calm, though rage burned in his chest. That's right, friendly of you boys. Keeping an eye on my ward, but I'll take her home now. The second guard laughed harshly. Your ward? That's rich. Girl's railroad property now caught trespassing on company land. Train's coming to take her where she belongs. That's so. Yet's voice carried across the yard, drawing attention. He saw Henry position himself casually near Estrella's post, while other allies drifted closer. Seems to me she can't trespass on land that was stolen from her family. Watch your mouth, old man, the first guard growled, unless you want trouble. Jed reached slowly into his vest, drawing out the deed. He held it high, sunlight catching the official seal. No trouble needed. Just truth. I got proof here that the railroad's claim is based on forged papers. Maria's father was the rightful owner of that land. A crowd began gathering, sensing drama. Jed spotted Mrs. Peterson and the Reverend among them, along with other familiar faces. Even strangers waiting for trains turned to watch. That's right, Reverend Matthews called out. I've seen the documents myself. The railroad's been cheating honest folks with false claims. The guards exchanged uncertain glances. The taller one stepped forward, trying to intimidate Jed with his bulk. Last warning, Clay. Walk away now or things will get ugly. No, Jed said firmly, his voice steady. I've walked away too many times. Watched too many good people lose everything to railroad greed. Not anymore. He moved closer to Maria, the deed still raised. Dust swirled in the morning breeze as townsfolk pressed forward, forming a circle around them. The guards' hands hovered near their guns, but they looked increasingly unsure as more witnesses gathered. Maria sat very still, her dark eyes wide. Jed could see tears tracking down her dusty cheeks, but her chin was lifted proudly. She looked So small, so vulnerable, yet her spirit shone unbroken. "These are forged railroad papers," Jed declared, loud enough for all to hear. "I aim to prove it right here, right now. Anyone who's lost land to these thieves, step forward and bear witness." The air grew thick with tension as he waited, praying his neighbors would find the courage to speak. The guards' faces darkened with anger and something else, fear. They could see control of the situation slipping away, their usual tactics of intimidation useless against this quiet show of united resistance. Behind them, the station master emerged onto his platform, watching intently. In the distance, a train whistle sounded, the noon train approaching. But Jed stood his ground, the deed held high, refusing to back down as the crowd pressed closer. Waiting to see justice done at last. The deed trembled slightly in Yet's weathered hands as he unfolded it before the gathered crowd. Sunlight caught the official seal, making it gleam like a beacon of truth. The guards shifted uneasily, their earlier swagger fading as more townspeople pressed closer. "This here's a legal deed," Jed announced, his voice carrying across the dusty. "Yard, registered to Miguel Two Feathers, Maria's father, dated 1873. He turned the document carefully, pointing to recent markings in red ink. "And here's what the county clerk noted just days ago, evidence of tampering on the railroad's claim." Dates altered, signatures forged, murmurs rippled through the crowd. The taller guard spat in the dust. "That don't prove nothing." "Could be. Fake itself?" "It ain't fake." Henry Lone Elk stepped forward, his quiet voice commanding attention. "I worked that land with Miguel. Helped him build fence lines on those very boundaries." He gestured toward Maria. "Watch this little one grow up there, learning her mother's prayers and her father's ways with horses." Reverend Matthews moved to stand beside them, his collar stark white against his black coat. "I've examined those papers myself, friends. The forgery is clear as day. The railroad's been using such tactics all across the territory, counting on good folks being too scared to speak up." The shorter guard's hand strayed toward his gun. "You're asking for trouble, preacher man." "No," a woman's voice rang out. "You're the ones in trouble." Mrs. Sarah Bennett, the miller's wife, pushed through the crowd. Her eyes were bright with tears as she looked at Maria. "I was there in church when this child sang her mother's hymn. Such pure faith doesn't come from a lying heart." She turned to face the gathering. "Who else heard her sing that day?" Hands raised throughout the crowd. "I did," several voices called. "Beautiful it was," added another. "Like angels speaking." The station master descended from his platform, dust coating his polished boots. "What's all this about?" "Justice," Jed said firmly. "These men aim to ship this girl to Denver on false charges. They burned her home, stole her horse, all based on forged claims to land that rightfully belongs to her family." More townspeople stepped forward, emboldened. The blacksmith spoke up. "Railroad tried similar tricks with my cousin's place up north. A farmer nodded, threatened my water rights. Last spring." The chorus of complaints grew, years of silent resentment finally finding voice. The guards began backing away from Maria, their earlier confidence crumbling. The station master frowned, glancing between the angry crowd and the railroad men. In the distance, the noon train's whistle sounded closer. Sheriff Wade Taylor pushed through the crowd, his star glinting. "Let me see those papers, Clay." He studied the deed carefully, then looked hard at the guards. "You boys got any official documents? Court orders? Arrest warrants?" The taller guard straightened his vest, trying to salvage authority. "We're acting on railroad business?" "That's not what I asked," the sheriff cut in. "You got legal papers or not?" "Well, no, but then you got no authority to hold this girl or her horse." The sheriff's voice hardened. "And if I hear about any more nighttime fires or threats, you'll answer to me." "Clear?" The guards exchanged glances, weighing their options. The crowd had grown larger, faces angry, while more riders appeared on the road. The train whistle shrieked. Again, much closer now. "Railroad won't forget this," the shorter guard growled, but they began backing away. "Cowards," someone shouted. "Bullies," called another. A few children threw pebbles as the guards mounted their horses and spurred away, dust billowing in their wake. Maria sat frozen until they disappeared, then suddenly burst from the crate and ran to Jed. He caught her in his arms as she sobbed, her bound hands clutching his vest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought if I left, they wouldn't hurt you." "Hush now," Jed murmured, his own voice rough with emotion. "You're safe, daughter. No one's taking you anywhere." He looked up to see Henry already cutting the ropes. From her wrists with his hunting knife, Estrella whinnied from her post, stamping impatiently. Maria pulled away from Jed and hurried to free her beloved Mare. The moment the rope fell, horse and girl pressed their foreheads together, sharing breath as Maria whispered in Apache. Estrella's coat was dull from neglect, but her eyes were bright again. Townspeople began drifting away, though many stopped to pat Yet's shoulder or offer quiet words of support. Mrs. Bennet pressed a fresh cornbread into Maria's hands. The sheriff rolled up the deed carefully. "I'll file a proper copy of this. At the office," he said, "should prevent any more trouble. Though you might want to ride fence for a while, Jed." "Already planned to," Henry said quietly. "I know some good men looking for it. Honest work." The train rumbled into the station, belching steam and smoke, but Maria barely glanced at it. She was already mounting Estrella, her face glowing with joy despite tears and dust. The Mare stepped lightly, head high, as if she too felt the weight of fear lifting. Jed swung into his saddle, looking at the girl who had somehow worked her way into his heart. Her arrival had stirred up trouble, yes, but also something else, something his ranch had been missing since he lost his family. Looking at her now, he saw not just Maria, but a future bright with possibility. "Ready to head home?" he asked softly. Maria nodded, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. Estrella pranced beneath her, eager to run. Around then, the depot yard was settling back to normal, though something had shifted in the sense that justice could indeed prevail when good people stood together. They turned their horses toward home, Henry falling in beside them. The autumn sun warmed their backs as they rode, and for the first time in years, Jed felt truly at peace. His ranch was more than just land and cattle now. It was becoming a home again, filled with the hope of new beginnings and the strength of chosen family. The morning sun painted long shadows across the ranch yard as Jed, Maria, and Estrella rode through the gate. The familiar creak of weathered hinges welcomed them home. Henry followed behind, leading his pony laden with supplies from town. The autumn air felt crisp and clean, carrying promise on the breeze. "First things first," Jed said, dismounting. "Let's get these horses settled." Maria slid from Estrella's back, her movements fluid and sure. Together, they brushed down the horses and filled feed bins with fresh hay. The routine task felt different now, more like family caring for family. Then, mere ranch work got as morning stretched into afternoon, they fell into familiar rhythms. Maria carried fresh milk from the barn while Jed mended the broken sections of fence where panicked cattle had pushed through during their absence. The steady rhythm of his hammer mixed with Maria's gentle humming as she worked dough for bread. In the kitchen, around noon, wagon wheels rattled in the yard. Mrs. Bennet and 3 other church ladies arrived bearing still-warm pies apple, cherry, and blackberry. Their earlier suspicion had transformed into motherly concern. "Such a brave girl," Mrs. Bennet said, patting Maria's cheek. "We're right proud of how you stood up to those men." The afternoon brought Reverend Matthews, his buggy raising dust. Along the road, he carried a small Bible, gift-wrapped in brown paper and ribbon. "For Maria," he said, pressing it into her hands, with passages marked in both English and Spanish. His eyes were kind as he added, "Your mother's hymn opened many hearts, child." "Don't forget that." Henry stayed busy throughout the day, riding the fence lines and talking with neighboring ranchers. His quiet presence helped ease tensions, bridging old misunderstandings with patient words. By sunset, 2 nearby ranchers had offered grazing rights if Yet's herd needed extra pasture data. Supper time, the kitchen glowed warm with lamplight. Maria served fresh bread and stew, her face bright with pride when Jed praised her cooking. They shared stories over their meal, Jed telling tales of his early ranching days. Maria, describing her father's skill with horses, their laughter, filled the once empty room, chasing away old shadows of grief. Later, as night settled over the ranch, Maria helped wash the dishes. She worked quietly for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you, Jed, for everything." His throat tightened with emotion. "I reckon I'm the one who should be thankful. Lord works in mysterious ways, sending you here." When bedtime came, Jed led Maria to a small room he hadn't opened in years. Inside stood a narrow bed with a handmade quilt, his daughter's room preserved like a memory. Maria touched the quilt, gently, understanding in her eyes. "Sleep well, little one," Jed said softly, his heart both aching and healing as he tucked her in. "You're home now." Autumn settled into a gentle rhythm at the clay ranch. Each morning, Maria mounted Estrella, her schoolbooks tucked safely in leather saddlebags, and rode the well-worn path into town. The kindly widow Morrison had offered to teach her, opening her sunlit parlor as a classroom where Maria eagerly absorbed reading. Arithmetic and history. Jed found his own peace in the daily work of the ranch. The morning dew sparkled on fence, wire as he made his rounds, checking cattle and mending posts. Neighbors who had once turned cold shoulders now lifted their hands in greeting. Some even stopped to share news or offer help with upcoming roundups. The telegram arrived on a crisp Thursday afternoon. Jed heard the distinctive clip-clop of the messenger's horse and stepped out onto the porch, squinting against the low sun. The yellow envelope trembled slightly in his weathered hands as he read the message. County Court agrees to formal review of Two Feathers land claim. Hearing gate to be set. When Maria returned from her lessons, Jed met her at the gate, waving. The telegram. Her dark eyes widened as she read, then filled with joyful tears. Estrella seemed to sense the excitement, prancing beneath her as Maria whooped with delight. "We must celebrate," Maria declared, sliding from the saddle. "I will make Mama's special stew and Papa's tortillas." The kitchen soon filled with warmth and mouth-watering aromas. Maria moved confidently between stove and table, measuring spices by memory and patting out perfect circles of dough. Jed tried to help, but his attempts at tortillas came out lopsided, making them both laugh. "You stick to roping cattle?" Maria teased, rescuing a particularly misshapen effort from his hands. Their supper was indeed a feast. The stew, rich with tender beef and chilies, steamed in clay bowls. Fresh tortillas, properly round ones, waited warm in a cloth-lined basket. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the moment. As twilight painted the sky in purple and gold, they walked together to the corral. Estrella approached the fence, her coat gleaming with health, muscles rippling beneath. The frightened, weeping Mar from the auction yard was just a memory now. Jed leaned against the rail, watching Maria scratch the horse's favorite spot behind her ears. "You know," he said softly, "after I lost Sarah and the children, I figured my life was over. Just going through motions, day after day. Then you two came along." He gestured to Maria and Estrella. "Gave me reason to wake up hoping again." Maria's hand stilled on Estrella's neck. "And you," she answered, her voice gentle as an evening breeze. "You gave me a father when I had none." Frost sparkled on the grass as 4 riders set out for the county seat. Jed and Maria rode side by side, with Henry Lone Elk and the preacher following close behind. Estrella's hooves kicked up, small clouds of dust, her gait steady and proud. Maria had braided colorful ribbons into the Marais mane for the occasion. The courthouse loomed ahead, its red brick walls rising 2 stories above the dusty street. Inside, polished wooden benches creaked as townfolk filed in, many faces now. Familiar and friendly. The railroad lawyer Samuel Burke sat stiffly at his table, papers arranged with precise angles. Judge Harrison entered, his silver hair catching the morning light through tall windows. He adjusted his spectacles and called the room to order. "Case regarding Two Feathers land claim," he announced, voice carrying to the back row. One by one, witnesses approached. The county clerk presented his findings on the forged railroad documents, pointing out inconsistent dates and mismatched signatures. Henry spoke of knowing Maria's father, describing him as an honest man who had worked the land faithfully. The preacher testified to Maria's character and the community's support. Maria stood tall when called, her voice clear as she told of her father's careful stewardship of the land, her mother's gardens, and the day the railroad men came. Jed watched her with pride, noting how the judge leaned forward. Listening intently, Burke attempted to argue legal technicalities, but his words rang hollow against the weight of truth. The judge held up Maria's father's deed, studying its aged paper and official seal. While final disposition requires additional review, Judge Harrison declared, this court finds sufficient evidence to protect Miss Twofeather's claim until full determination. The railroad is hereby ordered to cease all interference with the property in question. Burke's face darkened like a thundercloud, but he could only gather his papers in silence. Maria's eyes shone with happy tears as she hugged Jed tightly. The ride home felt lighter than air. Estrella seemed to dance beneath Maria, who sang her mother's hymn with joy. The melody carried across the open range, speaking of gratitude and hope in ancient Apache words. As evening approached, wagons began arriving at the ranch. Neighbors brought fresh-baked bread, sweet berry jam, and warm wishes. The kitchen filled with women helping Maria prepare coffee and slice the bread, while men gathered on the porch, sharing news and gentle jokes. Lamplight spilled from windows onto the darkening yard, and through the open door came the sound of singing Maria's Apache hymn joined now by other voices. Jed stood in the doorway, watching his once empty home overflow with friendship and laughter. Prayer and thanksgiving mixed with stories and hope, warming the frontier night like stars come down to earth that morning. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting golden squares on the wooden floor. Maria's cheerful humming drifted, and from the chicken coop, mixing with the clinking of Yet's hammer against fence posts, Estrella grazed contentedly in the nearby pasture, her coat gleaming with health, no trace remaining of the broken mare from the auction yard. Maria, Yet's call brought her running, dark braids bouncing. Inside, his weathered hands held out an official-looking envelope from the county court. She unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. As she read, tears spilled down her cheeks. The court had restored her full rights to her family's homestead. What do you want to do? Jed asked softly. Maria looked around the familiar kitchen, at the home they had built together. I want to stay here with you. This is home now. Yet? Eyes glistened as he pulled her close. I'd like that very much. Daughter. That evening, lamplight warmed their supper table. Outside, Estrella nickered softly. Jed bowed his head, his prayer full of gratitude for the family he had found and the new life that had bloomed from loss. The ranch house, once empty, now overflowed with love, laughter, and renewed faith. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here where love speaks softly and stays.